So welcome to the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow, where we're delighted to welcome you to our live stream of our Strings Pedagogy Day, or part of our Strings Pedagogy Day. We're incredibly grateful to Rebecca Henry from Peabody Institute, who's coming to talk to us about string pedagogy, and this session in particular is going to be on bow strokes. Rebecca Henry.
Great, thank you very much. So in our session on bow strokes, I always like to start with the martelé as our first stroke of learning and go from there. And I think sometimes it's hard to see the value of learning the martelé in relation to later strokes, like spiccato and portato and ricochet and everything else. But I have always found through all my teaching that if any of those extended strokes are a challenge for a student, the best way I have to work on it is go back and check their martelé. And if the martelé is functional, everything will come from that. So you might wonder why, why I think of it that way. So we know martelé is, kind of a hammered stroke, but the question is, how do we actually execute it? So the part of the execution that is so much value to me is, first of all, simply just setting the bow on the string, which doesn't sound like it's that complicated, but really the whole process of getting balanced on the instrument takes years. The ability to set, release your weight into the string, feel the string, and then go, preferably breathing first, and then being able to stop that, feel the string again, breathe, and go. So one of the great things about it is that release of tension in the hand and in the thumb during the stroke itself, which allows the string to vibrate. So you don't want the string to not vibrate when you go, but you want to release it so you can see and feel the string vibrate. You can actually feel it underneath your hand, that there's a release of that. So that's really, really important. One question that often comes up about martelé is, what's the difference between a martelé and a staccato? So I use the word martelé in a sort of training way. So I think a martelé, most people would agree, is something that starts on the string with a K sound and stops on the string with a K sound, or at least the beginning is that sound. And you could say, well, isn't that a staccato? And I think in string playing, up bow and down bow staccato are certainly related in outgrowths of martelé practice. But fundamentally, I think of staccato as a musical term instead of a violin term. So that if a conductor looks at the orchestra, he can say to the flutist, play that more staccato. Whereas he's not going to say to the trombone player, play that martelé. Martelé is a string term. Staccato is a musical term. If you just forget about up bow and down bow staccato, which are specific string strokes, staccato fundamentally is a musical term. So if you're playing an orchestra and you're playing this, the conductor could say, play that more staccato, and you add some collé into your fingers or something. You play it with more sharpness. So I think in the training, I stay away from staccato because of that confusion. And in the earlier levels, I just use the word martelé until we get to so many in a bow. Then I say, guess what? If you do 24 of those, you'll have an up bow staccato. But so that's kind of the way I use the word martelé. It doesn't mean you can't use the word staccato. You can use it when four in a bow staccato, four in a bow martelé, four in a bow stopped bows. I don't really care what the language is. But I'm just telling you that's kind of where I'm thinking of it, like from the ground up. I think of it a little bit that way. So one of the other reasons that it's so valuable is it teaches the thumb how to release, and that is important in every other stroke. So eventually in an artistic bow arm, we want it to be balanced and free and be able to do anything. And we also want to train how the hand feels and looks at different parts of the bow. And when you're working with students who already play, if things aren't balanced or don't look great, it's really hard to make changes when the bow is moving. It's like impossible to make changes when the bow is moving. So if the hand is too high or the shoulder's too high, it's really hard to change a bow arm that's in motion. Whereas if you say, okay, stop at every frog and relax your arm, Or stop at every tip and tap your pinky and make sure it's loose. Or stop at every middle and, you know, tap your fingers and, you know, check if your arm is too high or too low. It's when the bow is stopped that I find I get the most value out of stopping and fixing and finding where something is balanced. And then you move and then you stop and you recheck it. You can actually improve your relationship with your instrument that way. So that's one reason. So I'm going to go through, you know, sort of chronologically the process of developing a bow arm, starting with martelé. So the first step, and we talked about this a little bit earlier today, is just the upper half martelé. So we are releasing the forearm, opening and closing, and the back of the arm may come forward, but it's not an active motion, it's a passive motion. So with a young student, they might do a scale like this. For instance, just open, close, open, close. That would be like a first thing to do. Little songs, open string songs, string crossing. Just like this. Now when you're adding string crossings, another reason martelé is so valuable is you want to be on the right string before you go. So even with advanced students with sloppy string crossings, one of the best things you can do is wait, you know, wait and don't go till you're on the right string. So practicing things martelé can really be helpful for that even later on. So at the beginning, they're going to play a note, then they're going to cross everything to the new string, and play and cross everything to the new string. As they get more advanced, what will happen is they will make that cross at the end of the first note, and they will end on the new string. That would be more advanced, but that would be the next stage. And so you can practice all your etudes like that with the martelé ending on the new string. At the early levels, I would stop on the old string and then make the change. And that really helps clean up their playing. The next stage is learning to go at the frog. And that is like the last place anybody gets comfortable, is at the frog. So I'll give you a few things to think about for that. To prepare, we do pinky push-ups and a lot of exercises to develop strength at the frog. But essentially, when they're going from the middle to the frog, we're going to now engage the upper arm for the first time. And I don't tell them to go up, I tell them to go across. So sometimes I'll just have them lift the arm and go across the instrument and then drop it. And the reason I use the word across is because when you say up, the shoulder goes up. And so we need to isolate the ball and socket of the shoulder to go across the body without hunching the shoulder. So when we go from the middle to the frog, we'll go across and we'll stop there. And then we have to figure out how to be balanced there. This really does take 20 years, I think. But it takes a long time to feel comfortable at the frog because of the weight of the stick. So when we get there, I always have them tap their first finger, do some wobbling, do some pinky push-ups, relax their thumb, and then come back down. So you don't want to just say, for instance, if they're doing a scale, let's do it 2 times at the frog martelé. Because what will happen is they do this. And by the time they've got to the top, they look like a completely different animal. So I always build in the checking of what's going on into the scale. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite scales. Do you guys want to stand up and play along? So I'll show you the first one. So we're going to do a D major scale at the lower half martelé. And actually, let's just warm up first. Just set your bow at the middle. And we'll just do a warm up to get to that. We'll do the poof. So put your hand over your high dot, set your bow at the middle. We'll do this poof cycle. How about on D? So just do a martelé to the tip. Here we go. And then close and go back to your square in the middle. Good. Now when you go to the frog, for now I want you to keep your bow hold pretty much the same and go across to the frog. And then just boing, 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 go to bounce, do some wobbling, do a couple pinky push-ups, tap your first finger on the bow so it's not grabbing, make sure the bow feels like it's sitting, and then go back to the middle. Right, so that's really valuable. So let's integrate that into a scale practice. So we're going to do pinky push-up, pinky push-up. So we're going to do a pinky push-up rhythmically doing the rests. So set your bow right at the frog and pinky push-up. Let it go to the wrist string. The bow should go down to your G string. There you go. Right at the frog. Some of you are far away from the frog. Very frog. Pinky push-up. Let it roll over. Pinky push-up. Pinky push-up. Right. So that's really valuable. Another thing that's really valuable is to eventually be able to take your thumb off with the frog. So set your bow on your middle two strings to start. And make sure that you're not too pronated. So pronate your hand so you feel like too much pronation, too much supination. And somewhere sort of in the middle, balance in your pinky. Good. Now, keep your hand over your high dot and take your head off so your shoulders are loose. A lot of times when we go to the frog, we cave in. So you want to stay open in the shoulders, tall in the head and spine. Now take your thumb off. And you should be able to balance on those middle two strings like this and just lightly take your thumb off and put it back on. Right. So you will have really good, if you can do that, you're on your way to playing with the frog comfortably. So let's do this scale on the way down, and we're going to do this. I'll demonstrate first. Thumb off, thumb on, thumb off, thumb on. So we'll come down that way. Ready, and thumb off, thumb on, thumb off, thumb on. And flat hair. How would you flat hair for this? Off, on, off, on, off, on. Keep your head tall. Off, on, off, on. Okay, did you find that of value? I see some like, ah. So I'll tell you, I got the idea from that actually from a class I saw with Dorothy DeLay years ago before I started teaching. This was like pivotal in my own playing, and I didn't think about it again until I started teaching. And we'll try this too. She actually had a student, I'm paraphrasing of course, but what I got from that class was she had a student hold their bow with no bow hold. Can you all just do this? And set your bow like on one of your middle strings. And her point was that the weight of the stick at the frog is all you need to make a sound. So if you just do, I'll do some first. Just do some little martelets. Right. That sounds great. Right. So, yeah, maybe even better. So the point is the weight of the stick is all you need at the frog. And then, basically, your bow hold, you just basically have to not screw that up. She probably didn't say it like that, but you cannot get in the way of the stick. You have to hold it so lightly that the stick can do what it wants. So go back to this one again and do a few of those. Just join me. And just see how that feels. But now get your bow hold. Now hold your bow and set it there. Let go of your bow hold. Keep your thumb on, but let go as much as you possibly can, and then just let the bow do its thing. That's it. Right. So what's critical is that the frog, the thumb has to be really, really, really light so that you can allow the stick weight to go in. If you push your thumb and squeeze your thumb at the frog, you're going against gravity, and you're going to lose that sound. And then because you're losing the sound, then you go like this to get it again. And then you're in this kind of catch-22. So you have to learn to release all your upper back and upper arm into that and not worry about it. So that's a really valuable one. Now, if you have students that play very pronated or with a straight pinky, if any of you have ever had a student whose hand looked like this, the next thing I'm going to show you is a corrective thing. I don't really do it with everybody, but sometimes when you do corrective things, you have to exaggerate, and there can be value in that. So what I want you to do now is let your let your pinky curve on to the end of that first knuckle, like this. So set your bow the frog on your D string, okay, and tap your 1. So this forces you not to be too pronated. This may feel even too supinated for you, but it's a corrective, exaggerated thing. So just literally let that pinky curve like this and sit it on top. So let's just do it, set your bow on the string, right at the frog. Very frog, guys. Very, very, very frog. Okay, so we'll do 2 notes on every bow, D scale again. Alternate. So it's going to go like this. Rest. Rest. Finger up. And we're alternating from here to here, but try not to change the whole rest of your hand. So start with the pinky down on the high D. And then pinky on. And pinky down. Pinky on. Pinky down. Pinky on, pinky down, pinky on. Right. Does that make sense? So that's a corrective type of thing. You don't need to do it with everyone, but I find that adding these little ways of doing scales at the frog is super valuable because they're not looking at the music and they're working on balancing on the back half of the hand. And in a minute we'll talk about the transfer. So when you're doing whole bows, you have to transfer the balance. But I find it really helpful to spend a lot of time at the frog and figuring out that balance before you're asking them to do a lot of whole bows, because it's harder to get there from the tip than it is to sit there and be there, if that makes sense. So we'll talk about that in a second. I want to say a word about left hand, right hand coordination. And I mentioned it earlier when I said when we do open strings, at first we stop on the old string and then go cross and go like this, and then later cross here. But another value of martelé is the coordination with string crossings, but also with the left hand. So there are 1,000 different ways to work on that relationship. But I use the martelé in this way. Mind before body would be an example. So I'm going to play a D scale, finger, finger, finger. I call this finger before bow. And it means that you're choosing the finger before you move your bow. Now, it's not the only way to practice. You can also practice this way. And try to find your pitch. That's, different ways to work on intonation. But this is a way of organizing and coordinating that you're choosing your fingers before you hear it. That you know it's a whole step and you're going to put your finger down there. You know it's a half step before you move your bow and you choose it. So let's do a version of that. We'll just do our D scale and we're going to put our finger down rhythmically in the middle. So ready? We'll play just upper half martelé is fine. D, finger, 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 cross, finger, finger, finger. Right, and this also helps in orchestra work, ensemble work in terms of articulation is where it's at when it comes to playing together. You have to have the articulation has to be together. When they're more advanced, that finger before bow is going to happen immediately. So what I just did would be more like this is how we learn how to do it, and eventually that finger's going to go down at the end of the stroke. So now when I stop the D, my one N is there when my bow stops. Finger, cross, and the cross happens right away. So let's play it once like that. That would be a little more advanced. So we play finger, in scales, you can do it in Kreutzer 2, you can do it in wolf art, you can do it wherever they are, depending on their level. And with new students that are new to you that are a little sloppy, this is really helpful. This finger before bow and the martelets just cleans up their playing right away.
Coming down as well, because you use it.
Yeah, actually, thank you for saying that. It would be the lift, which sometimes is harder to think about, because they'll do this. Yeah, so lift, lift, release. Right, thank you. Yes, absolutely. The lift is the same thing. The next reason martelet, so martelet is great for that. Martelet is great for working on bow distribution. And we were just doing so far just half bows. But in the training with their scales, when I teach 2 per bow, even with slurs, I'm not doing the middle of the bow. Usually I'm doing half-half. So that when they learn the martelets, I want a relationship between that pulse and the slur pulse. That's related, because it trains the coordination of the left hand to be rhythmic. So if they're playing, their slur would be quarter, 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 quarter. So I know a lot of people play. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, you know, and especially when you want to go faster. That's just a different thing. That's a different thing. It's not like don't do that. But in terms of bow distribution, the relationship of the stop bows to the slurs to the pulse, if you train that in over time, then everything makes sense. So let's just do one of that together. So just play 4 martelets, D major, and repeat the top note, and use exactly a quarter bow on every note. Here we go. And then legato. And I find it really helpful for training distribution, pulse, and sound. Because if you work with the martelet, I think they get a little bit more in the string, like where is that? So they're not, you know, if they do this martelet, they're getting control of the vibration of their strings. And then you can always take it away as they develop. It becomes more sophisticated. You learn how to do that with less of a stop. So we'll do that in scales and runs. So for instance, if you're playing any concerto with a run in it, which is like every concerto, or a simple piece, and the connection musically, of course, is kind of obvious. So if they're just doing, and they're playing quarter equal, and you want to put a crescendo on it, then you teach them, oh, guess what? We get to break the rule now. Like, I just find that they have to have, it's like discipline. You have the rules first, and then you break the rules to make music. But if you only do, oh, let's do crescendo and get louder, but they don't know how to do it, you can spend things. A lot of times what happens is they get the idea of the music, and they want a crescendo, and they want to do it, and they're going, but they don't have the execution. They don't know how to do it physically. They know they want to hear it that way, but they don't know how to execute it. So what I have found is if you train really understanding of bow distribution, half and wholes, and even, you know, whole, half, half, whole, half, 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 and you just really drill that. Then when you want to break the rule, they can control it, and they have like a language for it. So if you want to do a crescendo, then you say, well, what can we do with our bow distribution? And we do save, spend. So I just tell them it's like going to the bank. You save your money, then you spend it. So you save, then you spend. And you save, and you spend. And so they then have a language for how to do a crescendo or a decrescendo by how much bow they use. And they can catch this, they can understand this at the ages 5 and 6 and 7. You know, you can develop this in. So oftentimes to match to their repertoire, when they're first learning a piece, you know, they do separate bows and overlaps and martelets and rhythms and equal bow distribution and whatever. And then as they're understanding the music itself, then we break any possible rule to serve the music. But I still think that that grounding helps them rhythmically, and coordination, you know, helps them just give the foundation for everything that they're learning, and then they go through and gradually, of course, you aren't really hardly ever playing the same amount of bow on anything really. You know, you aren't really playing a sustained stand on everything, but you have to be able to do it. And then you open out from there, if that makes sense. Whole bows, okay. Whole bows are hard. You know, if you look at the early method books, they all start in C major and whole bows, and I think, man, how did anybody ever teach like that? That's just like so hard. But whole bow is like the hardest thing. So I guess the way I've ended up is that I find if I do upper half, lower half, and maybe middle third balance point work also around the balance point, if I get a handle on those, then I go whole bow. And when they're little, actually, you guys stand up for this. We do a game, the rocket ship, right? So you come down here, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're going to go, where do you want to go? Scotland, yay. They usually say, Disney World. I say, can you like be a little more creative? But often, I want you to do it again and come down here and tell me what your thumb looks like when you're down there. Where's the thumb pointing? Down, okay? Now go to Scotland. and now where's your thumb? Or actually I take it back. Let's go to the middle. Let's go here. We'll go to California. So let's go here. And the thumb is maybe slightly, it's not totally down anymore probably, slightly perpendicular sort of to the stick, mildly. And when you go up, it may still be there. And if you point your thumb to the ceiling, you'll get your collé. There's your collé right there. Going from where your thumb is kind of perpendicular to the stick to pointing to the ceiling. That's your collé motion right up there. So when they're little and they're doing this rocket ship, you know, all these little games they think are just like, a lot of people think are just stupid games. They're far from it. What you're actually doing here is allowing the thumb to learn to pivot underneath there on the stick. So if your bow hold is tight, just squeeze your bow hold and try to do the rocket ship, and you'll end up back where you started. You know, you can't go up if your thumb is tight. You can't get past a certain point. The thumb is going to have to pivot, right? So when we
So when you're up here and for that little play, what word do you use? Because you said that the thumb's pointing.
So with young kids, I don't go that extra step. I just say go to wherever, you know, Mars, and I leave it at that because I'm just looking for some pivot. But later, when they're more advanced, if your thumb is fairly perpendicular to the stick, the collé action, the fingers only, this kind of thing, the thumb is going to pivot until it's pointing up. So it's not going to be looking to here. The thumb is going to pivot up. That's very sophisticated. I'm not doing that with the beginners, but I'm just showing you how that might extend, and you can use it with older students. So the thumb does not stay static in one spot. And that's a hard thing when you're teaching beginners, because you are kind of telling them to put your thumb here. Just put it there. But actually the whole thing about the martelé is that when the bow is moving, the thumb is loose, it will change its position with relationship to the stick. And that's why the martelé is so valuable. If their thumb is tight, if you start here and you keep the thumb tight, you know, either that's going to happen or that's going to happen. I mean, you're going to be doing all kinds of, the bow will go like this. All kinds of things will happen. The thumb has to be flexible to respond to where it is in the stick. So these little bow games are helping to kind of get to that point. So there's a transfer of balance, right? So silent bow placements, go to the middle again. The thumb might be fairly perpendicular to the stick, a little bit pointed down, however, something. The fingers are fairly equally felt, all four fingers, you can hug them. Now lift and go to the tip. Your balance is now on your index finger, and the back half of the hand should be more relaxed. So the pinky is not active here, unless maybe you're a violist and you may use a little more pinky because it just needs it. But I wouldn't get into strong pinky at the tip with young students. Okay, now your thumb has changed position. So when you go back to the middle, you have to allow that thumb to pivot back so that you're more equal. From here to the frog, honestly, I think it's not much different. pretty much here, except what's different is the balance has changed now. You're feeling the power in the back half, so you should tap your first finger. So a good exercise here is we'll start at the middle. It's like our poofs. And tap your middle 2 fingers at the middle. Then go to the tip and tap your pinky. Go back to the middle, tap your middle 2. That ensures that your outer fingers are working. Go to the frog and tap your index finger. And that ensures that you're feeling some balance back here, and go back to the middle. That's a good exercise for this. And then another great exercise that I'm sure many of you may know all of this, but repetition is good, right? We all know that to be true. So is down 2, 3, 4, up 2, 3, 4. Maybe you've seen this before. I'll do it in martelé first. So I'm going to do quarter bow martelés. So I'm going to go down. The second one, I'm going to take off my pinky. Then I'm taking off my ring finger. Then I'm taking off my middle finger. And now I'm feeling just the index finger, and I'll go up, add the middle, hug that ring finger, and add the pinky. Tap the 1. Okay, let's do that together. So set your bow to frog. So this helps them learn how to do that balance change. So quarter bow, don't do anything different. Take off your pinky. Take off your ring finger. Take off your middle finger. Now just stop and feel. There's no way around it. There's counter pressure with the thumb and the index finger. No way around it. Your arms should be relaxed, shoulders open. Now just do an up bow. Add your middle finger. Add your ring finger and really feel that that ring finger is going to hug. Your hand should square out. Now add your pinky. And then do a couple wobbles or pinky push up, or take the thumb off, or do something. Tap your 1 so that you realize that the transfer has happened, and now your index finger and your thumb are soft. So at the tip, you feel your index finger and your thumb. At the frog, you don't feel your index finger and your thumb. Now let's do that with a legato bow. Okay, so we're going to do legato. Ready, and down, 2, 3, then up. Up, 2, 3. That's right. Then the next stage I'll just show you. And you're wanting to kind of not feel a lot of bubbles. You know, if you're not even with this, you know, you'll hear that kind of stuff with your students. It takes a long time to figure this out. But you're going to go down, 2, 3. You have to kind of add that weight. And then on the last one, I'm going to take off my 1. This kind of goes back to the Dorothy DeLay thing, that if you can play in the bottom quarter without the 1, you're probably on the right track. So for this exercise, I'm probably playing with the flat hair, because that's where you get the best gravity. Later on, I will ask them to experiment with tipping the bow with the frog, but I would not do that in this type of exercise. And I'll come back to that maybe. Issue of flat hair. Okay, so here we go, and down, 2, 3, 4, up, 2. Now take off your index finger. And then stop and see if you're balanced. Right. Let me say one word about the flat hair. So I know a lot of people teach tipped hair and then flatten it out later. And I think probably we all play like that most of the time. What I have found in the training ground up, though, is that I prefer to start with the flat hair and all this martelé work for several reasons. One is gravity. One is just plain old gravity, that if you have a flat hair, I find it easier to take your thumb off and find the balance. And whereas if you're telling them to turn, at the earlier levels, they manifest that often in the wrist and the arm and the shoulder. Really what you want when you turn is you want to be able to control the tipping inside the thumb and fingers without getting arm and shoulder and other stuff in it. So I view that as a later skill, a more difficult, challenging skill. So I start the beginners with a flat hair and these martelés. And then at a certain point, we'll even do legato like that. I think you should be able to do this, whether you play like that most of the time or not. If you want to play forte, you might experiment with that. But eventually, we may want to tip it there, depending on the music. But you ought to be able to do that without all these other kinds of things going on, like, okay, tip your hair, okay. And then they lose their connection to their back muscles. So I do these exercises with a flat hair, and then later we'll do this kind of stuff where we see if you can keep your sound still and wiggle like that. So just try that. Just do and just experiment, but keep your sound good. But don't do it from like here. Yeah. So that's a value. So I'm not saying by this that because I get that question sometimes, why on earth would you ever teach flat hair? And these are the reasons I like to train from flat hair at the early levels and make sure they can do it when they're more advanced. And then you can tip it and still have good balance. Then for the whole bow, the martelet. Okay, I'm going to play a hobo martelet. And now I'm going to play a hobo martelet the way most of my students do it the first time I ask them to do it. So they usually either do this or this. You get bounces, right? So the bounces, that particular bounce, maybe you can see why I'm getting that bounce. Anybody want to? There may be more than one reason. You know, you don't have to tell me 8,000 things I'm doing wrong, but there's a fundamental reason. Right. So I went out. So basically my arm did not come down soon enough. Right? My arm stayed up while I went down low. So my arm did not drop with the stick. Right? The arm has to be in perfect, the upper arm and the stick are the same thing. They go like that. And what I did there was, I went like this, I went down bow, but my arm stayed up. So when this is not together, you're going to get a bounce. So if the arm doesn't drop, usually you get a bounce somewhere in the lower third of the bow. And the opposite, if I drop too soon, I tend to get the bounce a little higher in the bow, like where I drop it. So I dropped it too soon. So to really play a pure, clean down bow, I'm not thinking about playing a straight bow or pulling or pushing or anything. I'm just thinking about dropping my arm in a way that my bow is happy. Like the bow wants to be in the right place, I just have to not get in its way. The bow wants to go straight. It just wants to go straight. The minute I try to do anything controlling, I get something else. So just play a few down bows and just, let's all do them the same way. Let's leave your arm too high when you go down. Try that. And you'll see that, okay? Now drop your arm too soon. And you'll see that. Now drop it all together. Right, so you don't want to think, just go. Don't think. And so really what's happening is the bow is happy. The bow wants to be straight. And you have to help your students in all ways possible that their hand and fingers are actually adapting themselves to the bow. Does that make sense? You're not trying to make your bow go straight. You're allowing your bow to go straight, and you're not getting in the way, which means your thumb might have to pivot or your arm might have to drop or whatever. You're just not getting in the way if the bow wants to be straight. And that's kind of like maybe just gobbledygook, different way of thinking about it. But I actually find that really a helpful way to think about it. The bow wants to be straight. Just get out of its way and you'll figure out where it wants to be. So have a seat again. I will say one word about bow changes, because bow changes are like a huge challenge, and I don't really have a secret for it. There are a lot of different ways people negotiate trying to play a smooth bow change. But I will tell you one story. So I told you that my early training was with a Galamian person. So I did a lot of this kind of work where you make circular, I'm going to exaggerate for a second, where you make circular motion and the arm goes first and the fingers follow and pivot. So everything comes from the big muscles and then follows this way. So I was trained with a lot of this in my earlier years. This kind of thing. I'm exaggerating to prove a point. So I did a lot of that, trying to get that smooth. And that's one way of thinking about it, making things round to do that. Then when I went to study with Yauzer, who was Hungarian and new to the USA, he said, what is all this? Why are all these people moving their fingers around so much? What is this? And I said, well, it's Galamian and this. And he said, but it's so simple. Why are you working so hard? Why are you doing all of this? And I'm like, okay. And so, you know, he told me what to do. I'm having trouble with my crossings. And he, with this, you know, European cigarette in his, you know, and his fingers over his like gazillion-dollar instrument, just made me sit in the ashes like this, and I'd be like, you know. And I said, well, help me because I'm having trouble. And he said, no. He said, you go up bow, and you're perfectly balanced, and then you go down bow. That's all. And I was like, okay. And I was like 18 going, you know, so I had to then spend the next couple of years getting rid of all of this and my playing and trying to figure out, you know, how to keep things more just unified and not all of this and move less and just go, you know, and he did talk about it more coming from the joint in the shoulder and not so much here. But I still have always found it a challenge, but it wasn't really until much later when I was teaching that I went back and thought about that sentence. You go up bow, and you are perfectly balanced, and then you go down bow, and then you change directions. And at the time I don't think I really got what he was saying. But when I started teaching, I really started to understand, and you are perfectly balanced. That is not simple. That's the part that's not simple. Being balanced is not simple. And as we talk, especially at the frog, when you know you have the heavy frog and all of this, and how do you get balanced at the frog? So I always think of balance like, what do you call it, the guys up on the high wire? You know? Okay, so you're up on the high wire and you cannot make yourself be balanced. You can just feel the wind and you have to like sense and allow yourself to figure out where that is. You can't force balance. It's like, you know, so yeah, I'll figure that out in my life another day, but you can't force balance. You have to like allow it. And so I guess I thought about that a lot in my teaching with the stop bows. That's like where you can stop and go, oh, where is this anyway? Where is this balance? Where does it feel like I really truly am balanced? And from there, it's not so hard to go back and forth. I mean, I'm not saying I can execute this perfectly, but I feel like I get that. I can do it that way, I can do it this way, I can do it without it. You know, eventually you should be able to do it anyway. But it took me a long time to figure that out. So that's why the martelé is so valuable, because it's all the time finding where the balance is. Once you are balanced, then you can start working about getting back and forth on that 2 inches of bow. But if you're not balanced, it will not happen. So I guess that's, did you have a question?
Wasn't it because you first of all have got a kind of super hyper movement that you could then restrict it and feel the purpose?
That's a really good question. I don't know which way, but I will tell you that in my teaching I do it the other way now. So I do not teach young kids the Galamian circles. I find that too complex for young kids. And I have to say, I didn't have that as a child. I was like in high school when I went through that. It's not like I was, and I didn't start when I was tiny like they do nowadays anyway. But I think that in my teaching, I don't do the circle stuff until later. I start just clean. Just go up, and you're perfectly balanced, and you go back down. So I've kind of reverted to that in my early level teaching. And then later, as we're getting into more expanded things, I start adding circular motion and collé and more fingers and messing around with those things. And then maybe I go back and take it out again and take it through that circle. Because I guess in the end, I feel, because I had both trainings, that there's good things about both of them. And I think if you do the opposite of the way you're used to, you will get something out of it, even if you don't fundamentally change how you play. Does that make sense? You know, you'll get something out of that. So that's kind of how I think of that. I start with not just finding loose and balance, and then later I do this stuff. Another thing about martelé in the training that's valuable, that maybe makes less sense to an advanced player. So a lot of times I'll have students play for master classes, and because I do so much of this, I have them like touch, relax, set, breathe, play, because I want to be sure they're balanced. As we get more sophisticated, there are many times we don't want to start that way. You know, we want to start in the air or in motion, and not from there, right? But I guess what I look for is, are they balanced enough to do that yet? So when they're first learning pieces, I'll always still have them set, check, breathe, play. And then later I'll say, let's see if you can set with less time. So now we're going to breathe with our right arm. So we're going to do a preparatory breathing motion with our right arm. Then we're going to set and play. So now we're going to breathe instead of here, which I do in the early years. Later I will say breathe, and then at the last minute. And then don't set it, come in like an airplane, you know, and then just in motion. But I'm telling you, if you're working with advanced level students, that's not that easy. That is not that easy. And if they can't do this, just go back to Mark. Just set, balance, breathe, play. It means that they aren't balanced when they come at that. They aren't. All of this is not lined up. They're either too high or too low, or all the stuff we just talked about. You have to be in balance in order to do that. And a lot of really great players, when they're working with students, they know that's what they want, but don't always know how to distill it down. And so sometimes I've had my students play for great players, and they'll say, why are you setting your bow before you start? Don't do that. It's so unmusical. You know, I'm thinking, you don't have any idea. But what I'm thinking of, yeah, it takes years to get to the point where you can do that well. And I feel like the starting from the string in the training years is one of my best ways to get there. And then as soon as they can, of course, you know, you breathe, set, play, and then you breathe, play. But it takes a long time to get there. And the same thing is true for sophisticated bow strokes, like you know, I hate to say it, but in our early levels, and they're playing little Bach things, I'm having them do what I would call a martelet, or a pretty martelet, you know, where they're stopping. Because I want them to feel the articulation. This sort of middle range bow stroke that's not détaché and it's not martelet, you know, doing, which may be closer to what you would play, or even lighter. That's really hard. That is really sophisticated. And I think I came to terms with allowing kids to play Baroque music a little more square when they're young, because that's the strokes that they're developing, and they aren't sophisticated. They aren't able to do those well yet, and lightening it up as they go along. Same as like set the bow, play, and come from the air when they actually have the skill to do it. So I think, you know, like lighter Baroque strokes are more advanced. They're just more advanced. And so, of course, you're going to do that, but the first time you work with that repertoire, it might be a little more square, and then you gradually, you know, go in that direction. Those are really tough calls to make. I'll do a couple things about spiccato. So we did one, and you might think, why is that related to martelet? Well, it's because you have to look over your thumb, basically. And so we already did this one where you just drop and let it bounce, and drop and let it bounce. And then I'll do a jeté where you drop and let it bounce. So you're just letting, you have to feel the stick bounce inside your hand and trust it and not grab. So I wouldn't do anything with spiccato until you've done those things, because the minute they start doing this if they're tight, it's, you know, not going to go anywhere. Then I do big circles coming from the gross motor again. So my approach to spiccato training for someone who's never done it would be gross motor and sloppy. So they start big, and we just do big circles, and we just drop. And you want to feel it in your back and everywhere, and just loose, and I don't care where it is and where it sounds. And gradually you can say, oh, now can you like hit the same two strings? You know, and then you could say, oh, maybe could you play, you know, halfway between here and here and not just like anywhere? Or can you pick a spot and keep it at the same spot so you can gradually give them more controls? But at the beginning, I would just want them to feel free. Feel free. And we do it up bow. And just whatever, big and sloppy, loose in the air. Then we'll do a circle and then a salt and pepper shaker. Because one of the biggest problems in spiccato is they bounce and then they grab, and then you can't let it bounce again. You have to be able to balance the bow in the air without grabbing in order to do spiccato. So it's kind of like martelé. You play, there's probably some energy in the hand when it hits. But when you release, you have to let go of your bow hold. You can't be still grabbing. So you have to train that. It takes a long time. So we do a lot of this stuff. And then I do down, up, shake, shake, down, up, shake, shake. And this is kind of very Roland-esque. We do a lot of this. And if you notice, I'm actually swinging my instrument the opposite way and keeping my head off. And I think that helps a lot. Because when they're like this, if they tighten up in the whole left quadrant, then this right arm will follow that and it won't allow to move. Going back to the cello, it's easy to do, your shoulders are more down when you just do open strings. But on the violin and viola, you've got this to deal with. So I just put the hand here and just open out here like that. Another early spiccato exercise I do was actually inspired by my brother, who was a percussionist, not professional, but growing up. And I'm from a big family, so the deal was he had an amazing percussion teacher who had this 3-car garage turned into a studio that had instruments from all over the world and 3 different sets of timpani. It was just a sight to behold. But basically the deal was it was 45 minutes away, that if I drove him to his percussion lessons, I could have the car on Friday night. So, so I drove my brother for probably 3 or 4 years to his, or a couple of years, 3 years, like my last year, 3 years of high school, to his percussion lessons, and did my homework during the lesson in this big room. And it wasn't until later that I realized how valuable that was to me. And then of course I tried to play all his instruments, which I couldn't do very well, but the drum roll, at some point I made this connection between learning a drum roll on a snare drum and spiccato. So the sticks of on a drum are a lot like the bow. And what's interesting about it is that one of them you hold very much like a bow, you know, this way. And the other one you hold underhand, which is like a German bass bow. So one is under and one is over. And they're actually, if you ever try the bass, it's very, very similar. You know, it's the opposites. But the kinds of exercises they do, and over time, because I listened to these lessons over years, was bum, 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 left, right, left, right, left, right, you know, paradiddles and all these cool things. But my favorite exercise that he did to learn how to roll is, I do now with my students on spiccato, and that is you just start big, really big, and then you go a little smaller and faster, and the moment you feel tight and it doesn't work, you go the other way. So he would go left, right, left, right, left, right, and you could hear it be even, dot, 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 and then it would just kind of fall apart, and then you work your way out the other way. And over time, you get so that you can get smaller, and then you go the other way. And it's actually the going the other way is not so easy. So let's stand up and do this one. This is also good for retards. The organic nature of retards and subdivisions, and doing that organically, how space and time go together, there's a relationship between this and that. So we don't have to play together. Play with me at the very beginning, but in the end we won't be like rhythmic. So hand over your high dot, feet on the floor, head off the instrument, and we'll just start really big. I would do middle 2 strings is the best. So just real big and sloppy. Use your whole arm, and just go real fast. You know, you could spend hours on spiccato, so I'm not going to get deeply into it, but I will do, you do want to sequence what's difficult about the left hand and the right hand. So I always start in doubles, and then separate fingers, obviously. I'm going to say one word about this bowing because I think it's a special bowing. And that is that the first time I do it, I keep the bow on the string after the slur. Let's do a 2-octave G like that. Don't repeat the top. Keep the bow on the string after the slur. And it's around this bow stroke, type of bow stroke, that I do talk about circles. So I will talk about, I'm exaggerating now. I want the arm to drop, and then it's going to go up, and then it's going to drop. So just join me. Get this stroke, the change of balance will happen in the air. So I'm going to kind of do this slowly. The change of balance actually happens in the air. So when you're in the up bow in the air and your arm comes down, there should start to be a change of balance in the hand in the air. It's not like, so you're in kind of a pull position. This is more of Baghlamian circle stuff. But you're not going to come down this way. You want to come down that way. I'm kind of exaggerating. So think about that a little bit. Right. So I'm exaggerating these motions so you can see them. Now, if you're playing Mozart, so maybe you're playing Brahms, you could do what you just did. If you're playing Mozart, probably there's going to be a release in the bow after the slur. And it also depends on your speed. But you wouldn't play most Mozart things like this. You play, you're going to release also after the slur. So that's harder, so that's why I teach it after. But for that, actually, both of those are in the up motion of the arm. So the arm is down, up, up. The arm is doing this, and the hand is going down, up, and you might add a little finger action, which we haven't talked about, Cole, but we can add that. So let's do the 2-octave scale, a little faster, lift the bow after the slur, and for now, think about a circular arm. See if it does it any help. Ready? And. And again, and. Of circular talk when I'm entering into these bow strokes. And then, of course, you can do too much of it and you can take it back out again. But I think it can help with these transition things. There's nothing, then ricochet is kind of an outgrowth of the spiccato. It's basically a jeté with a piqué push-up. So what I want you to do first is, and this will not, I'll do one, I'm not counting my down bows. I'm just doing a jeté, and at some point, I'm going to do a pinky push-up. So I'm doing this, and at some point, I'm going to do a pinky push-up and stop my bow. So this is just an exercise. So just do this. Yeah, at some point, just push your pinky down, and your bow will pop up. Just do that again. Right, so there's some value in just doing that. Now, when we do a ricochet, I usually start it in the balance point because that's where they can get it. And when it's usually performed, it's usually faster and out here. But I think it's functional to do the training slower in a part of the bow they're more comfortable. So if we do this, down, up, do it with your arm first. Down, up, down, up. Right. Now, you're not really counting those two, you're just letting it drop. Now add a little bit of pinky push-up to the lift. You can still use your arm, but add a little. So just join me. Just feel that pinky. Good. And the reason I do that is because back to this idea of pulse and bow, it's like shifting. Pulse and bow being connected. When you go up is when you have to go up. So whether you get the number of bounces or not you wanted, You know, if you're trying to play, I don't know this bow, I have to find it. and it's not working, but you still have to go up bow at the right time. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. You still have to go up at the right time. You can't count 1, 2, up, then it's too late. Like you have to be in the zone of that rhythmic feeling. So just do some down ups, and I want you to, we'll go a little faster. I want you to try different parts of the bow. And just to see, but get that pinky on your elbows. Use some arm, sometimes that helps. Down, up, right. Something about that, right. You just have to get in the groove with your whole arm and with your pinky. I think there's a little bit of that. If you want to do 3. Let go of your bow hold and just try to figure out when to go up, but it has to be with the rhythm. And that's it. So that's some ricochet. Then I have no idea what time it is. Are we all right? A few more minutes. Collé. Okay, why is martelé connected to collé? Because it's the same thing. You have to start from the string. So with collé, the action, I think of collé, a true collé stroke is probably something like this, where you touch the string and you pick it off with your fingers and wrist. In the training of that, I call it collé action, as opposed to collé stroke, just to try to be more correct about it. But the action has to be trained slower and on the string. So I do a couple different things for this. You remember the martelé poofs where we went tip, middle, frog, middle? I'm going to do the same thing without my arm. So I'm going to go middle, tip, middle, up, middle. And I call these the mini poofs. So if I'm the student, I may hold the scroll for them, or I might hold their arm for them and not ask them to do what I just did, which isn't great for you to do. But just try that yourself now. And imagine somebody's holding your arm, but I won't do it. So set your bow around the balance point or a little lower. I find it works best about around here somewhere. And find your bow hold in such a way that it feels fairly evenly squared, slightly pronated, Mary. Okay, now you're not going to move your arm. You're going to do a tiny little down bow, which is going to require your thumb to point towards the screw of your bow. So let's just do a little down bow. Okay, and you're probably very pronated now, or at least extended. Now go back to your quote-unquote middle. Okay, now when you do the up bow, kind of like the rocket ship, your thumb is now going to point to the tip of your bow. So now do your up bow. That's usually the harder part. And now go back to your middle. Right, so let's just do that in a cycle. So down, middle, up, middle. And again, down, middle, up, middle. Good. So that's one good exercise for that. Another one is just to simply put your bow at the frog. This would be kind of a Galamian thing. Drop your arm, feel the pull, all the way until your fingers are supinated, and then go down. So that can be a way of helping somebody find what is that feeling when you're up there, if they're having trouble finding that. It's kind of related to this, which you drop and then you go. It comes kind of from that idea. So there are lots of things you can do with this. When they're younger and they're playing and their martelés are getting good, I just tell them to flick their wrist. Just do that on an open A. Start at the tip and just flick your wrist a little, that's all. Right, so if they're flexible, they'll be able to do that. And if they can get a little of that, you have to watch out because sometimes they start overdoing it, and, you know, but if they can do a little of that on a martelé before they've like lifted the bow even, then eventually you'll be able to do it here. So now we'll do the mini poofs, but we'll do them like collés where they'll come off the string. So put your bow back at your middle. Now do a down bow and lift like this. Okay? Now we aren't going to do 3, we're just going to down and up. So now set it where you are. and now do an up. And end so far back, like really extreme, just exaggerate, and set your bow there, and then go down, and set your bow there and go up. That's right. Now let's do some ups in a row with circles. So we're going to do up, I'll do it first, and then I'm doing a backward circle with my hand and fingers. I'm not using my arm. So do an up bow, and do the circle just inside your wrist and fingers. Set, 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 set. Good. Now we're going to do it the other way. So we're going to go down, and we're going to be doing all the circles. And set, set, set. Right. So then eventually they can do scales like that. Set, pick, set, pick, set, pick, set, pick. And then later, when they get good at that, then you can try just doing it at the last second, which is harder. And then you can go back and use collé action anytime you need it. You know, like in spiccato. If you're playing something gentle and then you say you want more action, you want it more spicy, add some collé action to your spiccato. But again, like I was saying earlier with the, I don't even know if this is really connected, but when I was saying that when you go to the tip and the back of the arm moves, that's passive, it's not active. When you do spiccato, I like to think of the fingers as being fundamentally passive in the training. I'm not really activating my fingers at this moment. It means that I don't have a lot of variety in what I'll get, but I'm just passive. Then the activity in the hand comes depending on what kind of music I want. You know, whether I want it to be lighter, want to tip my bow, I want it spicier, I want more brushing. I'm going to add more finger themes into that depending on what the music is. But the fundamental stroke I like to teach from the arm, and this is loose. And if this is loose, then you can do anything. Does that make some sense? And go ahead and sit down. And then there are, of course, anything that you decide to do when you teach, you'll see somebody else do it completely opposite of you. And then you go, what? And this has happened to me with Clara Berkovich, the woman I was telling you about, Hillary Hansford's teacher. I watched her years ago teach a lesson on with a student who was playing a piece that had a lot of spiccato. And she had the student doing this. Seriously. Like I sat and watched this for like 5 minutes. I was like, whoa, okay. And it was so interesting, and I talked to her about that, and she goes, oh, this student plays so sloppy. You know, she needs to listen. She needs to really listen. How the bow comes from the air, how it hits, how it is releasing. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, good for you. You have all these students that can actually do that. Think about it that detailed, you know. But there's value in that too. There's value at a certain point in doing the opposite of what you do. So I tend to come big and sloppy and then zone in. And actually that particular student was pretty sophisticated. So that was not a really young student. But it made me realize too that whatever's opposite of your tendency to do with the student, there's value in trying that. And then you go, oh wow, that was really helpful to a student, like playing close, finding their contact point, or really listening deeper, you know, finding something so detailed. And that's kind of what she said to me. She said, oh, they can't do it for the whole lesson, but if you do a little bit of that, and you listen to it in the lesson, which means they have to think about it at least as long as you're listening to it, it will deepen their awareness of their listening skills. And I learned a lot from that too. So sometimes, I mean, I would say I don't do that a lot in my ground-up teaching, but with older students, it's really valuable to try opposite of what you're used to. And even if you think there might not be much sense in it, you'll find that there is sense in what somebody else is doing, or they probably wouldn't be doing it. You know, there's some sense in it, and it's just a matter of where you put it in your sequencing. And then, down bow and up bow staccato, I think, is a lot like the martelé. To be honest, if the students have done a lot of martelés, that's not as hard for them. But my main thing I would say about it is the end of one note is the beginning of the next. That when you stop a note, that stop is the beginning of the next note. what you get a lot of is you hear people play a note, finish it, then start the next one, finish it, and then start the next one. So there's like too many motions in the hand. So just skip that middle one. Just stop, and that is the beginning of the next note. So one exercise is that really helpful for it, it sounds really bad, is if you do focus on the stops. This sounds really bad, but it's almost like stop. But just focus on the stop. And that's actually harder than it sounds, because people want to start, which is different than stop. Does that make sense? Yeah. So focus on the stop. And finger before bow. So if you're playing, when they're practicing that, first I start backwards. Always do down bow first because it's easier. And finger before bow. And then when it's faster, it's easier. And then up bow later. We're going to run out of time, so I'll say a word about portato. We talked about it a little bit with that exercise, but I think of portato as sort of the combination between the slur and the martelé. So if they're playing, I would have them practice it slurred, stop, and then both. So I think the portato action can be thought of in opposite ways, and I have found that different students attach better to different way. Okay, so one is that you're dipping the first finger. You're like you're petting a cat. You are dipping into the first note that you're playing, and then you're relaxing, so that you're playing. That you're focusing on the dip. I'm dipping those first fingers, then I'm releasing. The opposite is to think that you're just playing and you're releasing the end of each note. So that's a different feeling. I personally find it easier to think of that way because it allows me to connect with the basic legato phrase better. You know what I'm saying? So when people are portato, they often, they forget the slur, they forget the line. You know, they're just going wop, 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 and they're not going, you know, they forget the big picture. So that's why I often have them do the slur, and then, because I tell them the arm in the legato and the arm in the portato is not different. The arm is the same. The arm is legato, the fingers are doing this. It's you know, your gross motor is the same. So you will see this a lot, where they're actually stopping the arm. And I actually tell them, don't stop your arm. Just keep the arm going. So if I think of it pushing, it's a little more romantic sound. And if I think of the release, I think it's in more, maybe a lighter music. So that sounds kind of like a picky detail. But I do find in working with students that they tend to be able to do one way of thinking it more easily than the other. And I just go with whichever one that kind of works for them, and then at some point they can experiment. So that may sound like a really tiny difference, but I find it's actually quite interesting how some they can think of the push or the release, and it works really well, and the other one they can't conceive of. So it's just fascinating. So I think about that a lot. And then I guess in the end, the point is artistry, right? So it's easy to just talk about these concrete exercises and get your pinky strong and, you know, get your bow to bounce and, you know, do all this physical stuff. And sometimes in a workshop like this, it's easy to, I mean, obviously I'm fascinated by this stuff, but, you know, really in a lesson, it's there to serve the music and to try to find a way, you know, to really make sure you can do whatever you want to do to make the music come as you want, or to experiment in that way. So I guess in the end, I think the martelé is, for me, the grounding to a sophisticated bow arm that eventually allows you to do anything you want. So that if you hear something your hand will find a way to do that. You know, if you can do all of these things, then you can, if you can divide your bow well and be even, then you can undivide it or divide it unequally or do whatever you want, or travel bow, or you'll figure out if you have control over all parts of your bow, then you can make any decision you want when you're making music and experiment with where in the bow sounds good. But with your students, you have to help them be comfortable at all parts of the bow and with all the different strokes, and then help them see how they can manipulate it to serve the music. And the manipulation goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about Goldilocks and Three Bears, too high, too low. So I'll just give you a couple examples in the spiccato, just so you can see that you can do with students, you know, do a spiccato, let's say that when they're having trouble with these, make your hand too pronated, make it too supinated. Where does it feel good? Make it too high, make it too low. Where does it feel good? Squeeze too hard, squeeze too light. Where does it feel good? And again, so everything eventually, when you get these manipulations going, it has to relate to the sound. And that they can experiment and they can figure out where it's balanced on their instrument for their hand, for their sound. And then you go into a piece of the music and, you know, do you want it lighter, longer, softer, this or that, and they can learn to manipulate that. And eventually they'll just find that. They don't need to always be able to explain it like we do, but they'll be able to find it. They'll be able to find it. So that's what we want, right? We want to be able to do anything we want. We want to get something in our ear and just go. And so hopefully that gives you some suggestions. Are there any questions? I mean, there are 1,000 more things we could talk about with the bow, but are there any questions on any of that? Or anything I didn't hit?
I was just going to ask a practical question. You know, all these series of little sequences and stages, they're just on a purely practical, and how do you pass that on so that they're actually practicing that during the week? Because it's a lot of, do you write out for them all? Do you put them in workbook?
Well, I think that with the younger students have practice charts or a notebook, and I have warm-ups, left hand, right hand. So maybe we're working on spiccato. I'd give them, let's do your jeté this week, let's do that, let's do this, and the right and left hand, let's do finger taps and that. So I'm cognizant of like what we're heading into, and I want to do the warm-ups ahead of the real skill. So I am thinking that way. And then I use it a lot of these things in scales. I use a lot of these things in scales. So they have their routine, 2 through 24 in a bow, or whatever it is, up and down. And then I have a whole scale packet, you know, with like a zillion different bowings that are attached to a lot of these things, like with different ways to do things in spiccato and this and that. And sometimes I'm very orderly about it, and sometimes I'm more like, you're playing this piece and you need more of this scale, and I'll do it that way. And sometimes I'm just random. Sometimes I'll pick something just because I think they can't do it and they need a challenge, you know? So I go back and forth, honestly, I mean, between being really sequenced and completely throwing it out if that's not what they need right then. But I do have always warm-ups that they're doing, and I always have an idea for them that they have a technical focus for the month or the semester or the week or whatever it is. What's our main thing that we're trying to improve in your way of being with the instrument? So maybe for one student it is better balance at the frog, or it might be intonation, it might be something in their posture. You can't fix everything. You know. Somebody said something really great, and that was, somebody asked a question once about rehabbing, which is kind of a bad word, but rehabbing, correcting. And there was a teacher I know who said, everything after the first lesson of their life is rehab. If you think about it, once they are holding the instrument, that is what you're dealing with. And actually, that helped me a lot, not only in my teaching, but for myself. It was kind of like, it's not that any one of your students is in terrible shape, or they're awful, or they're weird, or twisted. It's like, that's just where they are. This is how we play right now. This is how we're holding our instrument. This is how we sound right now. This is where we are. We're on a journey. This is where we are. And then you have to kind of pick one of those things that's going to help them be more comfortable with their instrument or sound better, regardless of what the pieces are. So, you know, I guess I try to pick from these things which thing is going to help that person sound better soon, so that they get rewarded by that and are motivated. I might think that I don't like how they hold their bow, but they might get a pretty decent sound that way, and the vibrato is so tight they don't sound beautiful. I might start with a vibrato. You know, I'm going to start with what's going to get them sounding better right away. They have to start sounding good. They just have to start sounding good because that's what they like. They want it. They have to enjoy how they sound. And then sometimes, so changes, you know, ground up working, kids kind of will try to do what you tell them maybe, but at a certain level, they really don't care how they hold their bow. I mean, I kind of hate to say that, but you know, I care how they hold their bow, but they really don't care. They go home and they practice and they play, and they're not sitting there going, oh, you know, 12-year-olds, let me think about this. I mean, how many of your 12-year-old students are going home and go, oh yeah, oh that feels so much better. I mean, so on one hand, I spend that time in the lesson, and I know that it doesn't really go on at home all the time for them, but usually they will hit a point in their development. That might be in their teenage years, it might not be till their 20s, where they go, oh wow, you know, how does this work anyway, and can I have control over this, and can I make decisions, and then, you know, they don't remember half what we tell them, so, but it gets integrated. So they don't need to articulate it, but you hope, I mean, I remember, actually it was Sky who was just visiting once. I worked with her for a long time, and she was very, very emotional player, but quite sloppy at the beginning. And we went through a lot of like this before she started, because she would just, you know, she had this and I specifically remember the day she walked in to play a scale, and she went, and I was like, oh, praise the Lord. You know, it was like, I did not have to say it. Usually I'm set your bow on the string, tap, relax, going to take a deep breath, go. So I make them go through those rituals in the lesson, and I wait for that day when it's integrated, and they don't even realize it. They don't realize it. You just have to do it. It's like telling the kid to brush their teeth, you know. You just have to do it, and give them the information and ask for it. Ask for it. If they come in playing like that, just say, oh, set your bow, you know, just don't let them do it. You know, and there are certain things in your lessons that you are going to not allow in your lessons. Just kindly say, oh, set your bow first. Oh, no. And sometimes with the student, you say, I'm sorry, I can't listen to that all day, you know, or just whatever, you know, just find a way of saying, you know, prepare yourself for what you're doing. Think before you play. Take a breath before you play. And when they go home, you don't know what happens. They come back, but they will start to learn to expect that, and then they will start to want to do that. And they might not tell you that or anybody, but you will know in it. You will see that in them. It will happen, but they don't remember it, or they're not going to thank you for it, or anything like that. You know, they're not going to really remember it, but it will be in them. You'll see what assimilates, but it takes years for physical change to assimilate. So be very patient. Actually, patience is one of those words. So I was talking to someone once who's a psychologist who said to me, you know, I'm not sure I would use the word patient. And I was really had to think about this. They said, because the word patience implies frustration that's being controlled. Like patience is controlled frustration. Like you're actually really frustrated that that student is playing with a crooked bow, but you're so patient that you're not showing that to them. And so we had a big conversation about this as a psychologist, and it really changed my thinking, this conversation. And it started creeping into all of my teaching, and even now I still use that word sometimes, and I try to catch myself. But his point was, you know, if you really are in the process, you want your students to be process-oriented, right? You want them to be in the journey, in the process where they are. Then you as a teacher have to be there too. You have to be in the process with that student, where they are, and work with what's there. And if you're frustrated, either you're asking them to do something that they can't do and don't understand, or or it may be that they're lazy and didn't practice, in which case you just have to have that. So then you have to say something, and you have to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to show frustration, but you can be practical. And I've done this. I had a student once, he was a teenager. I wouldn't probably do this with a 5-year-old, but teenager come in, not practice. And so then I said, show me how to practice this section. And of course, because we've done it 1,000 times, he knew to practice it. And I said, I'm going to go get a coffee. I'm coming back in 15 minutes, and I want you to be able to play this section. You know, don't make, you know how to practice this. A waste of my time. I'm going to go get coffee. I'll be back in 15, and you show that to me. And I left, came back. He played it great. And I said, see you next week, and that's what you need to be doing. So it's like, you can, you know, you don't have to be nicey nice. But I wasn't going to just scream at him. You know, he's probably getting screamed at by his parents at that age. You know, it's like one more screamer they don't need when they're teenagers. So, you know, I think it's more about responsibility. And with some teenagers, I've said, you know, I have a concert this weekend. I really need to practice. You know, like, I really need to practice. And this hour with you, I would so like to be practicing if you're not going to give me something that you put your time in. You know, I could be using this time in another way, you know, and it's like they don't realize that. So I think I've learned, instead of just being angry at them, to just, I mean, in a way that's harder on them. It's giving them responsibility and saying, you know, I know your parents are paying for this, but you know, it's not that simple. Money, time, money, time. I need something more from you than just showing up, you know, because I have lots of things I could be doing with my time. So I think there are times when you can have those conversations. It's a little different than just being patient. I don't know. It's one of those things I think about. I don't have the answer. I think it's really hard. Motivation and all of that is a challenge. I don't think any of us have that totally figured out. And every kid is different. But I do think there's something, especially in the younger learning process, just trying to kind of be where they are and figure out, you have to feed what they're good at, what their tendency is, what they like about it. Like if they like to read, they have to have new songs. If they like to make a beautiful sound, you have to indulge that. You know, you have to figure out what they love about it and indulge that and then stretch them in the ways that are weaker for them. And I guess that's my philosophy. I don't know. Any other questions about Bourne or anything or anything really? And then I don't remember what time we go till. Okay. 4 till 5:30. So I think we're about to have a little break.
Just it's more about what you're talking about now. If you've got, you know, teaching in group situations,
right?
That sort of, you know, do you have teach almost always in group situations? Right. In group situations between, you know, maybe a smaller group you might have is like two or three children, and sometimes it's more like 10, 12. You know, right. But you know, that sort of, that sort of motivation side of things and trying to tap into, you know.
Well, I think with group teaching, and I do, you know, a fair amount of that, although most of them also have private lessons, so it might be a little different. But nonetheless, I guess what I look for is groups do best, I find, if there's some kind of ritual that they know to expect. Like how they open up their cases, how they get in line to get tuned up, how they, you know, whatever your first thing is. The discipline aspect is if you can get a ritual going that they learn to expect, that is really helpful. Then I still do a lot of the same things. I do start with warm-ups. I start with physical stuff to do with the instrument that maybe not super specific. I do scales, and I'll pick one piece to work on intonation. Either a scale or a piece or one note. And actually somebody asked me about intonation earlier because we haven't talked about it. So I'm going to show you one thing I like to do. Okay, so let me have the 4 of you stand up. And this would be something I would do in a group to help develop oral awareness. So I want you all to just play a B with whole bows and just try and tune it. No vibrato, just play a B on the A's, just whole bows. So I might go around enough to get to this point, okay? And just keep playing. Now I'm going to make your B too low. Can you fix it? Can you adjust it? And I'm going to make it too high. Can you fix it? Good. So I'm going to make your B too low. Can you fix it? they don't hear it in tune, they don't know what they're going for. So they don't know what they're going for. Now maybe in an individual lesson, they play in tune. And I had an interesting conversation with a choir director many years ago, because we were talking about this intonation, and I said, and of course singing and sing play and all that, but I said, it's like I'll have students that are playing in tune in the lesson, and then I go to group class and they're like, you know, it's like, what's, you know, like all over the map. And she said that in the choir world, they talk about that is a developmental aspect. In other words, getting control over your own voice, and then when you're in an ensemble, being able to tell what your voice is actually doing compared to everything else. So a lot of times what they do when they're in groups is they hear the whole thing, but they don't discern the sound of their own instrument. So they hear the whole group and they're happy, they're going like this, but they're not hearing what's coming out of their instrument. And she said that she thinks that's a developmental thing, actually, in their development, the ability to separate that out. So this little exercise, first we get it in tune, and then I say, isn't that beautiful? Do you hear the ring? And if you have a pianist around, you can have somebody hold a chord, or you can have other kids do that, or have other kids play an open G while they're doing that to give a, you know, a third there or something like that. And you go around, and what you find is that you can tell if they're pressing too hard, they can't even move it. So sometimes they know it's out of tune, but they don't have the response, the physical response. And so you can work on lightening your finger, and you're also telling them, I'm making your finger too low. I'm making your finger too high. You're starting to give them the language for what that is. And then you ask them to adjust, and then they can hear it. They can hear it. So we'll do one finger, one note, and then we'll play a song that has C sharps in it. And I'll say, okay, let's all find a C sharp. Let's just find a C sharp, and we'll tune our C sharps. And really, it doesn't take that long. You can do that with 3 kids or 4 kids. You don't have to do all 15 kids every time. But they usually want you to come and do this. And then you say, okay, we're going to play a song, and let's see, I'm going to raise my hand every time we get to C sharp, we're going to stop and tune it. You know, and you raise your hand and you go, is that in tune? No. Okay, can you slide your finger out? And there's also another game I do with them. This sounds really weird, but I think, did any of you in your training ever feel that you felt stupid, horrible, you know, idiotic, unhealthy for not playing in tune? I mean, just somewhere in your training, did you feel like a horrible, stupid, idiotic person because you played something out of tune? I mean, there's something, so it's like you play the piano, it's like, oh, I played wrong note, oh, I hit a wrong key. You know, and you play a string instrument, it's like so personal. When we play out of tune, it's just like, it's so embarrassing. It's so horrible, and then if we don't know we're out of tune, it's like, you know, or you think you're playing in tune and you're getting string quartet and everybody wants your G sharp to be somewhere else, and you're like, what? So it's like, it's so personal. So I did this thing with the kids once where I said, okay, there is a boogeyman in here, and no matter what, this boogeyman is making it, you know, there's a curse on the room or whatever you want to use, and it's going to mean that every time our first finger goes down, it's going to be wrong. It's the first finger boogeyman. And your job is to fight the boogeyman and make that first finger go in the right place. I'm telling you, all of a sudden they play perfectly in tune. It's like if you depersonalize it, somebody else is making you play that first finger. It's not your fault. like if there's a boogeyman on first finger today, and they all of a sudden go, oh yeah, I can fix that. You know, so there's something about that. So with kids, I've used that a lot in group classes, and they start getting a sense as a group, like, oh yeah, we can do that. And then once they start to hear it, they will start to fix it. So I think intonation, of course, you have to sing, but you have to learn to slide your finger and change it and hear it. You can sing it in tune, put your finger down wrong and not know what to do. So the finger sliding in the lessons too, I actually move their fingers when they're first starting this out of tune. I just scoot it up and down, and then eventually they just make that adjustment. But you can also be more proactive about that and say, let's sing it, now I'm going to play it, I'm going to make your finger too low, and now can you slide and match? I think it's the psychology of that that's easier than say, no, that's too high, no, fix it, that's too low. It's more like, I'm going to make your finger out of tune, now can you find it? Oh, there it is! I'm going to make it too high, can you slide it back? And they don't know what you're talking about, and finally you get there, and they can't tell, and you go, there it is, and then they finally learn where it is. Do you know what I mean? And I do that in the lessons a lot. You know, if they're playing a note out of tune, I'll say, oh, let's listen to that. Let's check against your D string, or let's do, this, or I'll play it in Czech, or I'll play a chord on the piano, or you could do it in groups. So the first thing about intonation is adjusting. And the second thing is aiming. So I think there can be some value in practicing a scale helping them just hear the ring on everyone. And then there's value in aiming. And that I do with overlap. And on that, I go in a loop. And then if it's out of tune, you just go back and forth. So I and I do overlap a lot for intonation. So those are the two main things I do. First is the adjustment. And I just let the, and actually even with more advanced students, when they come and I hear scale with no vibrato, I want to hear that they can adjust it. I want, because that tells me if they're hearing it. If they have that ear-finger relationship. And if they can't adjust it, then I have to work on that. I have to work on it. You can't yell at them for that. I mean, if it bothered them, they'd fix it.
Can I just ask a question about just what you did there? So sometimes you lift your finger, sometimes you don't. Is that to do with, or is that getting, working out finger placement?
Are you here? So whether I was lifting the one or not. Actually, in this case, I'd probably tell them to leave the one down.
Okay.
So I may have been lifting it. I go back and forth because it gives them something, it gives them a rhythmic pattern loop that they stay in. So I love overlap practice. I do everything in their music overlap. So, I mean, as they go along. So that when they're practicing, because you want to, really in the end, you have to get from this note to that note, right? So if they can get from this note to this note, and this note to this note, and this note to this note, then they'll eventually be able to play it. So if you just overlap note to note in their whole piece, you can even do this with advanced music. Sometimes these kids, they just want to play their concertos. And so I've done this where I've said to some teenagers, next week I want to hear the first page overlap, that's all I'm going to hear. You know? And just find out, can they get from this note to that note? You know? And if not, you know? So there was a Kosha Wiesenbeck, who I alluded to earlier. She was Janine Jensen's first teacher, and she has a big class in Holland. She had this thing called the 10 Commandments of Practice that I kind of messed with and adapted. And I watched her teach a lesson once of a student who was her student. It wasn't a summer festival kid that she didn't know. And they were playing a little mazurka, and he played, and he had only had it for like a week or something. And there were a bunch of things not right about it, but she listened to the whole piece. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, I would have been in there fixing that rhythm in the first bar, you know? But she listened to the whole thing, and there was plenty wrong. There was plenty to do. She let him play the whole piece, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, why on earth is she letting him play the whole piece? But, you know, you learn from how other people work. And she played the whole thing, and then she said to him, did you play all the right notes? And he said, I think so. And she said, yes or no, did you play all the right notes? And then he said, yes, I played all the right notes. And she said, yes, you did. You played all the right notes this week, which probably meant that he hadn't before. And so she gave him some positive, yes, you played all the right notes. Did you play all the right rhythms? No, there's this place over here, I know, no, I think next week I'll hear it with all the right rhythms. Next piece. And that was like, I'm sitting there going, you know, I would have been in there fixing it, you know. And so I asked her, because we were living together, and so I was like picking her brain all summer. I said, okay, you got to tell me about this, because my instinct would have been, go fix those rhythms and help them fix those rhythms. And this is what she said. She said, well, he's my student and I know him, and I know that he knows those rhythms because we've actually worked on those rhythms before. He's being lazy. It was kind of that. You know, he knows how to do that. Next week he'll have it. And she said, you know, if you fix everything for them at every lesson, they won't become independent. They will just know that when they walk in, it's okay because you're going to fix everything for them. And I said, but what if they can't do it? She goes, well, if they don't understand it, of course you spend the time. But if you know they know it, don't waste your time. And she said, I guarantee you, he was fairly young. My older students, they never play wrong rhythms when they walk into their lesson, because they know that if they do, I won't do anything else. I will not talk about the music, I will not talk about the interpretation. If they're playing wrong rhythms, wrong notes, nothing happens until those are there. Now, interpretation, timing, that's different. I'm talking about playing all wrong rhythms, wrong notes. So I think, you know, she really just kind of set up, you know, you need to figure this out. And I thought it was really powerful. Well, you have to figure out for your age what's appropriate. But I think sometimes I fix too much, you know, and I think I learned from her, you know, okay, you do that on your time, you know, and it will make them be more proactive. But if they don't understand it, of course, you have to work with that and help them understand it. So I think we have a little break now, is that right? I'm not paying much attention to the time, sorry. Okay, little break.